A massive nerf for NATO RWRs? Well, let's take a look. First one, what is this actual nerf in the dev server? We're gonna talk about if it's realistic or not, and then give my opinion on the end of the video, okay guys? So what is actually happening? As you're gonna see in the gameplay that I have here, you will notice that NATO RWRs now, guys, don't identify some of the vehicles that they did before, right? So even some, missile launches made by Saklos and some other things, they're basically not being identified anymore, depending on the radar it's actually pinging you, locking you, and firing against you, right? You will notice that in the most advanced AA aircraft in the game by the NATO side, Gripens, F-15Cs, F-16Cs, and many others, you will notice basically a change where they don't identify, for example, a Panzer or a Tunguska as a Tunguska and a Panzer. They will identify it as AAA, for example, only, right? Without actually properly identifying the vehicle, right? And even some of these NATO RWRs cannot even like tell that you are being locked. They basically don't tell you anything until you die. You don't know that basically a missile is coming. You don't know if it's tracking you sometimes. The most advanced one, they all know that somebody's tracking you, but they don't know, for example, that a missile is being launched, anything like that, right? Which is kind of weird, right? So this is the main nerf that they did, right? All the NATO RWR, especially for top tier, cannot identify some vehicles anymore. So instead of Tunguska, instead of Panzer, it will appear as AAA. Okay, some fighters will appear as just fighter instead of the type of the aircraft. The main types will appear there, here and there, MiG-21, MiG-23, MiG-29, stuff like that, but everything else will not. Okay, that's the main thing that you have to notice, that it is the nerf. How effective this will be? Well, that's the thing, right, guys? This will make flying, especially for ground battles, a little bit harder, right? Because you won't know, especially if there is anything really locking onto you sometimes or firing missiles at you, but especially you won't be able to identify the S1, for example, being the Panzer, right? So you won't know that in top tier there's a Panzer shooting at you or there's a Panzer in the area, which can be very hard to actually fly. So how realistic is this? Well, guys, the majority of the consensus is that more or less, yes, it is realistic. And that's why I think, and that's how kind of the controversy kind of starts. Why? Because the thing is, you see that War Thunder is a game, right? And even General Lee yesterday did a very good video about this, right? Because the question is not about being realistic or not, or if these RWR should see these identifications and missile launches and everything or not. The thing is, we have a game over here, and being a game, should we have this type of realism, you know, being difficult in realistic battles, for example, to identify an AA system? Then it comes to my opinion. In my opinion, if it's realistic, yes, it needs to be added. If it's realistic, if they have sources on this, that these RWRs cannot identify these AA systems and stuff, I think it's okay. What is the problem even with that opinion? That I understand that it's not that simple of just, I want realistic stuff. Well, the thing is, for example, the Panzer operates in a very modern band of radiation, right? Which means that these older RWRs cannot identify it, much because they were made before the Panzer even existed and before even this type of of this band was even started to be used, right? Which means that you will see a top tier vehicle just like an F-15C and a F-15E and whatever, you know, these aircraft not being able to really identify anything that is close to being a Panzer, you know, which means that we would need a modern RWR or something, right? But even then, there are some RWRs that don't really identify them as a Panzer. They identify as just AAA, for example, again. So it's kind of problematic, right? Here's the question. Do you think that we need more of a gameplay line of thinking, or a game line of thinking, that maybe less realistic is better because you can have a more balanced gameplay? Or do you think realistic stuff needs to prevail? That's the question we are asking here on realistic battles. Of course, for arcade, the question is already answered. It needs to be arcade-ish. It needs to be more of a game. Everybody can identify everybody. Everybody can see launches. Everybody, it's whatever. In simulators, is the contra, right? It needs to be fully realistic, and inside the cockpit, you're not going to be identifying any type of threat, even if the RWR cannot identify. For example, if the RWR cannot identify a certain band of radar, it will not. This is, in RB is basically the middle ground, right? What is the gameplay thing that they're gonna add? What is the non-gameplay thing is gonna happen, okay? This is the question. And I gotta be honest with you guys, because the same thing is happening with the other countries as well, right? It's not only the NATO, like modern RWRs. This is a question that will happen with Russian vehicles, with every vehicle basically. Why? You will see, for example, the MiG-21 RWR will not identify some of the bands that we see flying around, but in RB they identify it, and they make you know that you are being locked. But if you go to simulator or inside the cockpit, you will notice that these RWRs, for example, for the MiG-21, the SPO-10, will not identify some of them. So this is already for other vehicles as well. It's a question that it's kind of already answered, right? Because this is already something that is happening. The only thing that really is happening here is that they are bringing a little bit more of the simulator features to the NATO radars inside RB. The problem that I have with not having realistic stuff is that it's easy to make a nation be favorite. Why is that? Because, for example, Russian RWRs never identify, until like the Pastel and stuff, they never identify the type of vehicle specifically. They never identified that it was an F-16, an F-18 or F-15. They identified that it was a fighter, for example. They never identified that it was an ADATS or a 103. They identified that it was a AAA. This was already the common thing with Russian 80s RWRs, right? But there was a feature that wasn't really added, which is the elevation and intensity of the signal for the Russian RWRs, which is something that they are introducing in the cockpit right now in this update. At the same time, the Americans also had some advantages and disadvantages. Knowing when a Sokolov missile is being launched, for example, is something that the Russian RWRs couldn't do, and the NATO RWRs could. And identifying the type of vehicle as well, together with the intensity of where kind of the target is that it's trying to lock onto you. So that's why I love realistic stuff, because each country will have its own differences, its own abilities. The Russians will have a certain ability, the NATO vehicles will have another one, and then you can have realistic kind of gameplay using those strengths basically and those weaknesses against or for you, right? And that's the thing. If it's realistic for me, I think it's okay. But the thing is, how realistic we should get with this in realistic battles. That's the question, And for me, I think it's problematic when you don't see a Panzer identified on your RWR, because, the Panzer is the Panzer. It's okay of you not of you not knowing maybe that a Tunguska is in the region and firing missiles. But a Panzer, man, a Panzer can hit you from like 15 to 20 kilometers if you use the missile correctly. It means that you're gonna get killed. So there's the question. I still believe that we need a balance of all the vehicles, even if it's a CAS, even if it's an EA system, an MBT. Everybody needs to have balance between each other, between all vehicles. Some people hate CAS, so they think that this is a good change because the Panzer can just eliminate all threats and we are fine. The ADATS can eliminate all threats and we are fine, right? So you tell me what's your opinion, and leave it in the comments, and leave it in the forums as well. Go in the forums and say, because if you want this change to not be added, this is the time to actually talk about it, right? This is the time to give the feedback on. Not a lot of people are talking about this, and I think it's a pretty big change, especially for ground battles, because you won't be able, guys, if you're gonna get your F-15E, right, you're not gonna be able to identify that it's a Panzer in the region. You're gonna get killed by a Panzer a lot more. I guarantee to you, until you get accustomed of flying in a very defensive way, even then, top tier will be a lot harder to do CAS on, just because of these RWR changes, right? Especially for NATO aircraft. So, I mean, Russian aircraft already suffered if it's the 80s, because they don't identify anything. They just identify that it's an AA system or an air vehicle, right? But even the Pastel has this ability to a certain extent. Some of the other WRs have this ability, but the majority of the NATO ones are losing this ability of identifying something like a Panzer in the region, right? So you tell me, guys. It's controversial. I know a lot of people will hate this video just because I said my opinion. This happens all the time if you give your opinion on the internet. But let's get going talking about this. Do you believe that it's a good change or a bad change? Let me know in the comments. Again, let me know. Let them know in the forums. Make sure to subscribe. Click the like button. As always, helps a lot. Thank you very much for that as well when you do. And yeah, guys, I think it's very, very interesting that they are changing and making, in theory, more realistic. But like, even the Gripen, man. Poor Gripen, it cannot even identify anything. It's kind of funny. But yeah, I see you guys on the next one. Make sure to subscribe and bye, guys. See you.